Lent, the beginning of this 40-day journey toward Good Friday, and then Easter. It begins with Ash Wednesday, when we cross our foreheads and we hear the words from dust you came, to dust you shall return. It's this reminder that we are all going to die, and we are all, not to be too morbid on this conversation, but we are all going to die. And yet it is in confronting that dark reality that we find the immense gift of resurrection, of Easter.
Unapologetic from Premier Unbelievable.
Many Christians around the world will be marking Holy Week this week, and to talk us through some of those key moments and to explore the relevance of Easter, which many of us will be celebrating this Sunday, is J.Y. Kim, the lead pastor at Westgate Church in San Jose, California. Jay is the author of numerous books, including Analog Church, Analog Christian, and his most recent book, Listen, Listen, Speak. Jay, thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a joy to be on.
Well, Jay, a couple of days ago, we had Palm Sunday, which sort of marks the beginning of Holy Week. What does Holy Week mean to you?
Yeah, Holy Week is obviously, for 2,000 years now, followers of Jesus have marked this moment as the story, in Christian understanding, the story of human struggle encapsulated in a week, coming to this really beautiful climax where, again, Christians believe the story that this week commemorates and remembers and celebrates is the story of victory over all that ails us and pains us in this life, for Christians and non-Christians alike. And the best way to summarize that is that Christians believe this is the week that remembers that moment when death itself, which really is quite literally the enemy of life, both literal death, as literal life gives way to the grave, and all of the sort of small little deaths that we experience all the time, in our relationships, and the death of hopes and dreams and plans and aspirations and all of that. This is the week that marks the moment when followers of Jesus like me believe that death was defeated and that death and the grave don't have the last word. And so it's holy. That word holy is a strange word. We don't really use it much these days. Or it's like, you use it like holier than thou. It's kind of a negative thing. It's about moralism or something. But really, holiness in its essence originally meant just different or set apart, set to something and therefore apart from something. So really, it is the holiest of all weeks because it is the moment when Jesus, through his death and then resurrection and ascension, sets apart human beings, sets us apart from death, and sets us toward life, both life to the full now and life after death.
And are there any particular moments within Holy Week, any particular days that you specifically resonate with, or that have over the years really come to kind of bring you comfort or challenge you in any particular ways, Jay?
Oh, gosh. Well, obviously Resurrection Sunday is the climax. It's the moment. But I think Resurrection Sunday, starts with the long season of Lent, the 40 days leading up to Resurrection Sunday. But for me, on a personal level, for many years now, I think Good Friday has always been such a beautiful sort of moment to pause and to breathe deeply. For those unfamiliar, Good Friday it's the Friday before Easter, and it is the day that followers of Jesus around the world remember not the resurrection, but the cross. And I think without death, there is no resurrection. Resurrection by its nature, by definition means rising from death or from the ashes or from that which seemed like it was the end, and then to experience resurrection. So Good Friday has always been so powerful because it has such resonant frequencies with life, that there is a sort of darkness and a sadness to Good Friday that I think, Christian or not, we can all relate to. Like I said before, we can all relate to these sort of mini deaths that we face on a regular basis. And I love that about the Christian tradition, that we don't just jump to the good. We immerse ourselves in what is seemingly bad. And for me, just as a human being, that is such a gift, that we don't ignore or turn a blind eye to that which is dark in the world and in our lives, but we immerse ourselves in it. Lent, the beginning of this 40-day journey toward Good Friday, and then Easter, it begins with Ash Wednesday, when we cross our foreheads and we hear the words, from dust you came, to dust you shall return. It's this reminder that we are all going to die, and we are all, not to be too morbid on this conversation, but we are all going to die. And yet it is in confronting that dark reality that we find the immense gift of resurrection, of Easter, that even that death will not be the end. So all of it has been so profoundly beautiful for me, but Good Friday especially is a moment I really look forward to.
Well, I love what you were saying about death there. And I know you've quoted in the past the anthropologist Anita Hanning, however you say her name, but she said that in the United States, the end of life has become so medicalized that death is often viewed as a failure rather than as an expected stage of life. I mean, why do you think so many of us are afraid of death? And it's often something we don't even talk about, is it? I suppose the pandemic was perhaps one of those moments where we really did begin to talk about death, because it was very much a reality for people.
Yeah, absolutely. The writer, there's this ancient writer who wrote a book in the Bible that we call Ecclesiastes. And there's this really profound, beautiful line where the writer says, God has set eternity on the human heart, and on human hearts, not on Christian hearts or religious hearts or spiritual hearts, on human hearts. Every human has a sort of leaning that they cannot control. And that leaning is a desire to persist and to continue to exist, and not just exist, not just breathe, but to really live, to thrive, which is why the little deaths we face on this side of eternity feel so painful, because even that feels like an enemy of life and life to the full. And then, of course, death itself, you talk about the pandemic and just those sort of jarring numbers of how many people needlessly and senselessly lost their lives. And just, I mean, this has been going on for all of human history. You think about the wars raging around the world even today, and that all of that feels wrong to us, Christian or not, spiritual or not, religious or not. It feels wrong to us because as a human being living and breathing and existing in this world, even with all of its brokenness, knowing that there is so much good and the potential for good, and that we have the great gift of life in which we can experience that good, it feels wrong to die. Like death feels like an enemy. And I know new atheism would tell us, oh, you got to get over that. And we are all just like balls of mass and matter. And your neurology tells you there's meaning and purpose and on, but really you're just sort of this enlivened ball of mass, and you come and you go. And in, 8 decades or so, the average lifespan or whatever, it'll all end, and you just got to come to terms with that. But even when we hear that, even if we intellectually believe that to be true, something about it feels misaligned to what it means to be human. And so for me, I think that's why Resurrection Sunday and Easter really answers the innate, intrinsic, sort of existential human question. Like, is this really all there is for me to, live the number of decades I am given to live? And then is that all? Even for the staunchest critic of religion and Christianity, I think when we're really honest with ourselves, something about it feels, wrong. At best, it feels incomplete or unwhole. And again, I think that's the question. That's the problem that Easter seeks to answer and to confront.
Now, a cross, a symbol of torture and death, is one of the symbols that's at the heart of the Christian faith. Many would argue that that's quite a morbid symbol, a little bit like having an electric chair or something like that. How would you respond to that, Jay?
Well, on one hand, I would say that's accurate. It is, in a weird way, like wearing electric chairs on your ears or around your neck. But I also think it speaks to the power of the Christian story. It speaks to the power of the Jesus story. My friend John Ortberg, he's got this fantastic book called Who Is This Man? And I think it's in that book where he has this fantastic line. He says, at the time of Jesus, the people in power were named Caesar, or Nero. And Jesus was the name. It was a common name, actually, of, amongst many Jewish boys and men. It was the name of just this, Jewish rabbi from a hodunk town, a no-name town. And yet here we are 2,000 years later, and we name cheap pizza parlors and our pets Nero and Caesar. And we name our children the names of Jesus's followers, like Joseph and John and Matthew and Mary. And it's so profound when you think about it, that this no-name rabbi from a no-name town had whatever you do or don't believe about him had such a profound impact that here we are 2,000 years later, and more people around the world have pledged their lives and their allegiance to him. And the emperors of Rome have been long forgotten outside of our history books. And so it makes all the sense in the world that the cross, which was an instrument of death and a painful, shameful death at that in the first century, is now the most widely recognizable icon in the world. This instrument of death taken in the hands of Jesus has been flipped upside down, and now it is a symbol of life and hope. And that is what Jesus does. It's why many people call the kingdom of God an upside down kingdom. Jesus himself taught that during his earthly ministry when he said things like the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And so it is that the instrument of death is now the icon of life. That's just that is what Jesus does.
Now, many people were crucified historically, but what was so significant about the cross of Jesus, Jay?
In Christian thought and understanding, the most significant thing about the cross of Christ is the fact that he did not deserve to be on it. It's a profound thought that in some of the gospel accounts, Jesus is flanked by criminals on his right and on his left. And Jesus has this interaction with them where one of them says, he mocks him, it's like, oh, you're the Son of God. Well, do it then, prove yourself, be the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. And yet the other criminal says, like, today, will you remember me, when you enter the kingdom? And Jesus says that he will. And there's this old hymn, Isaac Watts wrote this old hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. I love that image. It is one of my favorite hymns. And, the word survey today, we think about it like taking a survey online or whatever, or maybe like, somebody surveys the land, an architect or a developer or something. But really, when Isaac Watts wrote that hymn, it was about contemplation. The hymn really is about contemplating the cross. And the title itself is really profound, that as we contemplate the cross, this instrument of death, and a violent, shameful death at that, there's a wonder in it. There's a beauty in it. And to me, I think that is the profundity of the cross of Christ. that, again, upside down kingdom, as a man who unlike any other human, did not deserve that sort of punishment, because he held no sin, no brokenness in his body, in his life. And yet he goes to that cross on behalf of all of us. Again, whether you believe the story to be true or not, what is historically undeniable is that a first century Jewish rabbi named Jesus from a town called Nazareth died on a cross. And maybe he was a lunatic for doing this, but he died on a cross, at least in himself, believing that he was doing so on behalf of others, believing that he was doing so on behalf of me. So the fact remains, whether you believe it to be true or not, a human being died believing he was doing it for you. So that in and of itself, for those of us who feel totally unseen and on the margins and ostracized and forgotten, there was a man who you did not know, who believed he was giving his life up for you. So that in and of itself, I think, tells us your life is valuable, it's meaningful, it's worth something, and at minimum, it was worth something to the man who is the central figure in human history. That man died on your behalf, believing he was doing it for you. And that makes the cross wonderful. This instrument of death, this incredible symbol of absolute love. And it's worth contemplating.
Jay, you said that Good Friday is really significant for you. And I suppose, I don't know whether this is maybe a British thing, but I feel that we perhaps rush straight from Good Friday to the victory of Easter Sunday. And actually we neglect Holy Saturday, and we neglect what you were talking about earlier, the darkness and the rawness and the grittiness. Why is it important that we don't just rush from Good Friday straight to the victory of Easter Sunday?
I think it connects to what we were just talking about contemplation. Holy Saturday is a day intended to be the quiet space in between. It is intentionally a liminal space. And I think especially today in the modern Western world, where we are all about up and to the right, we are all about progress, we're about efficiency, we're about success, we're about habit stacking to make sure we are becoming every moment of every waking hour of every day. We are growing, again, up and to the right. Holy Saturday is a moment in time where we pause and get comfortable with the uncertainty, and get comfortable with the anticipation and the hope and the longing that this will not end in death. And I think that's relatable to all of us, again, Christian or not. I think when we're really honest with ourselves, much of life is lived in liminal, uncertain spaces, liminal, uncertain moments. When we consider our own lives right now, the situations and circumstances that any number of us might be facing, there is probably a lot of liminality, a lot of in-betweenness, a lot of, I'm not sure how this will turn out. And I think, again, that really matters in order to experience in full the gift that is the bright, beautiful, bold resolution of Easter, of resurrection. And so just like I have learned to so deeply appreciate Good Friday, I have also over the years learned to deeply and greatly appreciate and love the quiet and the anticipation and the liminality of Holy Saturday, which of course then leads us to Easter Sunday.
Well, and as you say, suffering and death and uncertainty are such an important part of the Easter story. But how do we reconcile this problem of pain with a good God? I'm aware that is a huge, huge topic and would probably take many, many podcasts. But if you could just summarize how we reconcile all of this death, all of this suffering with the idea that we have a good God who loves us.
Yeah, you're right, Ruth. That is a whole other podcast. Several hundred years ago, the Great Lisbon earthquake in Portugal people just look it up if they're unfamiliar. It was a seismic earthquake, I think like over 9.0 on the Richter scale. The ground in the city of Lisbon like split in two as wide as 15 feet at certain moments. And it wiped out like a quarter of the city. Like literally 1 out of every 4 people lost their lives in a matter of minutes. And what's so profound about that moment is it happened on All Saints' Day. So one of the reasons why so many people died was because when the earthquake hit, which then led to a tsunami, fires that raged for a week, and then a tsunami. That's one of the reasons why so many people died. It was like, a natural disaster on natural disaster. They just kind of piled up on top of each other. I know that's very morbid, but it actually gave rise to, some would say it gave rise to like the birth of atheism in many ways. And one of the reasons is because it happened on All Saints' Day. And one of the reasons why so many people died is because so many of them were gathered together in these small enclosed spaces called churches. And Enlightenment thinkers began asking the question, it's a good question, if there is a good God, and he is really good, and he is really loving, and he is actually God and all-powerful, how on earth would he allow on All Saints' Day, when his people were gathered to worship him, how on earth would he allow such devastation to wipe these people out? If there is a God, he must be evil, or better yet, there probably is not a God, right? That's what gave rise to that question. And it's a good question. And again, to be succinct about it, I would say what the Bible tells us, the story of Scripture tells us pretty clearly, is that we live in the fallout of sin. We live in a broken world. When Paul writes in Romans that all of creation is groaning, we're in pain. That's because the world is not as it should be. And I know that's not a satisfying answer, but it is the answer. The reason, the way to reconcile Easter and victory over death and victory over the grave with all of the pain and all of the death we see today is that Easter is the hinge point for all history. It is the center point. But in God's kingdom, because he exists outside of time and space, it is not linear. Easter is the center point, and all that came before Resurrection Sunday and all that will come after Resurrection Sunday, it finds its answer on that moment at Calvary 2,000 years ago, when Christ gave his life so that life and life to the full might be possible beyond death. That's where we're headed. We are actually in the future headed to the past, where Easter is the answer. And what the scriptures tell us is that there is a day coming. When you read the final few chapters of the Bible, the book of Revelation, toward the end, chapters 22 and 21 and 22 in particular, there is a day coming when the gift of Easter will be realized and actualized throughout all creation in full. When the groaning of creation, as Paul talks about, that groan will end and it will give way to celebration, because Easter Sunday will have its way over the whole planet. And there will be no more death, no more tears, no more pain, no more sadness, no more mourning, no more night, no more darkness, because the light of resurrection, the light of God himself will shine bright. And so to me, that's how I've reconciled it, that we live in the pain of it now, but the pain will not last, because Easter has come and it's coming again.
As you say there, Jay, Easter is the center point of the Christian faith, but why does it matter that Jesus really actually rose from the dead?
Yeah, Jesus's physical bodily resurrection matters because it tells us that for followers of Jesus, physical bodily resurrection is coming. There was a whole sort of ancient movement called Gnosticism, which separated the body from the spirit. Even in ancient Greek philosophy, we see this, people like Plato and Socrates, who basically were like, the body doesn't matter. It's all just physical matter and it's going to go away. Christianity stands in confrontation to those ideologies and those ideas. Christianity tells us that Jesus rose from the dead physically. He shows Thomas, doubting Thomas, when Thomas brings his doubts, what does Jesus say? See my wounds, touch my side. So the resurrected Christ in this new, renewed humanity, renewed body, also bears the wounds of his sacrifice. And in much the same way, Christians believe that when we rise again with Christ in the new heavens and the new earth, we will rise with resurrected bodies, renewed physical humanity, without all of the pain and all of the struggle, but in a body nonetheless. And to me, that's a tremendous gift, that I have a dear friend right now who is in her final days as cancer ravages her body. But it has been such a tremendous and poignant and profound gift for me and for my family to see her live with such hope as her body gives way to death. Her hope is found in that she is not going to be a spirit floating out in the ether somewhere, but that resurrection is coming and she will experience a renewed body soon. And I think that's hope for us all.
You definitely sort of touched on this a little bit. And again, it could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But why do you personally think that Jesus really did rise from the dead?
Yeah, I mean, put simply, Jesus rose from the dead so that we might rise from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead so that he could answer that longing for eternity in the human heart. And Jesus rises from the dead, not just so that individual humans can rise from the dead, but so that all of creation can be made whole. You read Genesis 1 and 2, before sin enters the story in chapter 3, a good God creates a good world. And he says over and over again, oh, this is really good. This is really good. And that's where the story is headed. Jesus rises from the dead so that God's good new world can come to fruition. And it will. And all of us who long for eternity, all of us who long for a good new world can have it, if we would say yes to his gift of life that he offers because of his death and through his resurrection.
Jay, thank you so much and happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you.
Unapologetic from Premier Unbelievable. For more shows, resources and our newsletter, visit premierunbelievable.com.